The exiled Kana was resisting the guards, but Isabel was already openly demanding that they take her out by force. The boy wasn't making any attempts to approach his sister. At that moment, it was very uncomfortable for Kana that her brother had already left a strong impact on the girl, so she asked him to stop calling her sister and go back to using their normal names. Kana turned around and headed for the exit, asking her brother to act as usual, since when she hated living, it was easier. At the Hades residence, it had been a month since the incident in Lucy's room. Now the girl was almost fully recovered and could have fun in the garden alongside Kana. The girl ran towards the garden. Where her sister was already waiting for her, Lucy's health was good, so she could live fully. But now a new chapter had arrived. The maid brought food to the terrace during the past month. Kana had not tried to get close to the family except for Lucy, as she clearly understood what her purpose was in coming to the Hades residence. Lucy began excitedly telling about her dream, in which they both visited a flower meadow and had a picnic there. The joy in Lucy's eyes brightened Kana, and the fact that her recovery had been quick and positive gave her more confidence. Although she wished to stay longer in the house, Lucy had few friends in the house, was holding her, so she asked him to let her go. Kaylin carefully set her down on the ground, so she took every opportunity to spend time with those who were kind to her. Lucy invited her sister to stroll around the city. They could even take Caleb with them. The girl began to doubt when Caleb appeared on the terrace. The boy promised not to interfere with the trip or accompany her if Kana didn't want to spend time with him. Lucy felt sad while Kana hid her irritation and tried not to reject her brother's proposal since her assumptions were empty, and she didn't care whether he was with them or not. Since returning to the mansion, the young woman had two goals first to get: permission for the divorce from Duke Valentino, and before leaving, recover her alchemy tools from her lab. She had no other pending matters there and didn't plan to stay longer than necessary. Grabbing a cup of tea from the table, Kana decided it was time to meet her father, even though she was embarrassed that in her society there was still the crude tradition that many things required a man's permission. Getting up from the table, the young woman informed that she had to resolve a matter and would return to Lucy to talk about the trip to the city. Lucy was glad that she would soon be back in a month at the mansion. He then turned to the guards and ordered them to leave the room. Isabel, Kana got tired of everyone insisting on calling her sister. Rubbing the girl's hair, she thought it was good that Kaylin remembered their last conversation. Her words that she should hate her had been etched in his mind. The conversation was more of a fight. Kaylin didn't understand why she wanted to leave the mansion if she herself had arrived there after leaving the Valentino family. If she herself had ended up there after leaving the Valentino family even behind closed doors. Loud voices could be heard as Kana tried to convince Kaylin that her wish was for a free life in solitude. The young woman asked him to hold on a bit, after which he would never see her again after that conversation. Kaylin began to doubt if he felt negative feelings toward his sister, since it seemed to him that she was the one who hated him. That realization hurt his feelings deeply. Kaylin reached out to take her hand, but the young woman had already turned toward the door. He watched her walk away. The boy couldn't understand why she held so much contempt for him. But to that question, another one arose. Kaylin had always been ready to attack, however, saw how the guards quickly left through the door. Now her plan was definitely ruined. The girl had lost confidence in her brother's eyes. Now he couldn't understand why she deserved his contempt at that moment, as being alone or Kana's presence had always been a sign he needed to learn to pay attention to. As a child, the strong influence she had on Callan was that his environment considered Kana's existence a mortal sin. She was a flower, tangled in the darkness of dirty rumors and offenses. But there was also her kindness that always manifested in her desire to help Kaylin with her pleas. That slight naivety allowed the girl to endure the attacks directed at her. That was the justification for why Kaylin had allowed himself to treat her that way since his birth. The reasons were simple. With each new offense received, he wanted to throw another one. But now with Kana changing, Callan's habits faltered. Yes, Kana Addis was born with dark hair, but that doesn't give him the right to look at her with disdain while preparing a new blow. After all, her birth wasn't her choice. Callan himself was trapped in his prejudices. But now that Kana is no longer that scared girl, he should reconsider his attitude toward her. The boy understood that he could never pretend to erase the past. But to try to save her dignity, she continued shouting words about taking care of Lucy. The brother approached Isabel furious. He committed against his sister. Just by understanding it now, he finds the answer too late. But now he has Lucy, so he still has a chance to fix someone's life. Kana's voice pulled Caleb out of his thoughts. The girl was saying goodbye to Lucy at that moment. The girl left the booth, but the boy didn't dare say anything as they parted. All this time, a strange feeling had been constantly appearing in his chest. Kaya was wavering between fixing everything or leaving it as it is, since her sister already has enough worries. Kana headed toward the exit of the garden. She assumed the Duke would already be home. Seeing the smallest movement among the trees, the girl began to feel anxious. But she quickly calmed down. Kana arrived at the main entrance of the palace without encountering anyone on the way. The hallway to her father's office was also empty, so no one bothered her. It had been a long time since she had been in that part of the house. That's why she felt nervous, but gathering her courage, the girl knocked on the door. She hoped the man wouldn't let her leave. But suddenly from the room, an invitation to enter was heard. Kana sighed and remembered her plan because she had dared to get close to little Lucy, the girl fell silent. Now that the boy was angry, she couldn't stand up to him. Do everything possible to get her father's authorization for the divorce and leave the Duke of Hades. Holding on to the door, the girl hesitated a bit. She needs to be brave. She can't demand permission and escape by pushing abruptly. The door swung wide open, but Kana still stayed frozen in the doorway at the other end of the office. Behind the desk was the Duke, who didn't lift his gaze from the papers, even when the girl approached him too. Kana time seemed to stop as she took a few steps. All her father's habits remained the same. He still wore glasses while working, and the sound of the mechanical pen broke the silence in the room. Even the custom of sitting in immaculate clothes was still there as she quietly approached the table. The young woman asked her father for a moment for a serious conversation. The man didn't stop working on the reports, but reminded his daughter that she could initiate the conversation herself, since if he didn't have time, he wouldn't have let her into the office. He still kept his habit of working nonstop, so Kana had no choice but to present her proposal. Her father's dry phrases took away some of her confidence, so she decided to pretend to be the victim since Kalen was channeling his anger at her, not at Kana, who had made a mistake in her treatment. But she remembered it was her only chance to get his consent. So gathering her courage, she announced that she had come to ask him to authorize her divorce from Duke Valentine. The man's hand stopped over the letter. When he heard his daughter's request, Alejandro Hadis looked away from the papers. He observed her and asked again what divorce she was talking about without holding back her emotions. Kana shouted that the main reason for the divorce lay within the Valentine family. The father took off his glasses, but listened attentively to the young woman's story. Kana began to recount in detail how the Countess had acted in her role as mother-in-law and the control she exerted over her life. The young woman confessed to all the abuses of the last 7 years, and the fact that even the servants no longer treated her as an aristocrat of the Addis family was the last blow to her patience. Trembling under her father's piercing gaze, Kana decided that no matter how badly they treated her, she had to expose all the offenses as if the Valentine family mocked the entire Addis family, not just her. The father remained silent, so Kana clarified it directly. She couldn't stand that the status of the Addis family, in the girl's eyes, the brother had become a traitor who had put a failure, was looked down upon by other aristocrats. That's why she needed to annul the marriage. The oppressive silence filled everything. The young woman wished that Alexander Addis valued the family's status as much as she did. That's why she insisted more strongly on her request suddenly. The father announced that he accepted the divorce and stopped asking questions. Kana's heart skipped a beat. Not even in her wildest dreams had she imagined such a quick response. The father turned his attention back to the document and assured his daughter that he would personally instruct the butler to prepare the divorce papers. But the young woman remained stunned in front of her father's desk. She expected to hear wishes for her to die in the Valentine family, not an agreement to the divorce. That's why she insisted to confirm if his decision was final. Dưới đây là câu đã được thêm từ khóa recap manhwa. Of course, she knew that family status was crucial for the Duke, so she wouldn't let anyone ruin it, not even an illegitimate daughter. Now that she had obtained consent, Kana began to worry that her father, despicable above the judgment of his own sister. Isabel needed support, so she decided to involve her mother in the discussion. Thought she intended to stay forever at the Hades estate. Kana started to invent a lie, claiming that she had always dreamed of leaving the empire and living in a coastal city. She hoped that promise would satisfy the Duke, and the young woman promised to leave the house as soon as the divorce papers were signed and never to return. But those words deeply shocked the Duke. Kana leaned to exit the office and wait for the documents. But suddenly, her father announced that he had changed his mind. At first, the young woman thought she hadn't heard correctly. But when her father said he wouldn't allow the divorce, she realized that her life would now be chained forever. The shock nearly made her lose consciousness. In her mind, one phrase echoed: her father wouldn't allow the divorce. The man returned to his work. For him, the conversation was over. Kana couldn't believe that his decision had changed so quickly and tried to figure out the reason for the rejection. Without getting distracted by the documents, the man used a cold tone to indicate that he was not obliged to explain his decisions. The young woman shouted that one could not simply change their mind in a moment. The girl with tears in her eyes began to complain that her care for Lucy wasn't important to Kalen. She clenched her fists when her father pointed out that she was old enough to modify her decisions. Alexandro Hades was a powerful figure. He didn't ask for permission from anyone or needed justifications. But unlike her father, for Kana, it was important to understand what she had done wrong, as she felt like a creature begging for permission from the master. Her voice trembled as she clarified if her father's rejection meant she had to return to the Valentino mansion and endure the Countess Elister's punishments. The man leaned back in his chair, took out a new folder of papers, although he stated that Kana should not return to a foreign house. With a quick glance at his daughter, he ordered her to stay at the Hades estate until he decided otherwise. But his next words completely shattered her heart, for now she could not leave the Hades estate without paternal permission. Kana tried to say something, but her father had not finished. So after a pause, he declared that his daughter would never leave the empire. Just then, Kana realized her mistake. She had been reckless mentioning her dreams to her father, and if they involved traveling to other lands, he would never allow it. Kana understood that her father hated her so much that even the idea of her achieving, he would allow her. Kana understood that her father hated her so much that even the idea of her reaching. Kana was exhausted from resisting, no longer knowing how to convince everyone that it wasn't her fault for suddenly treating her like this. Chloe had accumulated more wisdom in her life than Isabel and understood perfectly that as long as Kana was under Caleb's protection, her dreams enraged him, so even if she knelt before him, it wouldn't change his decision. She forgot her father had always hated her. Now she could inflict even more suffering on him. But before leaving, Kana had to say her last words, so she slammed the table hard to get his attention. The action didn't provoke a storm of emotions in the man, but he looked at her, setting aside his work. The girl's aura turned black. She didn't hide her anger. She told her father he had just deeply disappointed her, not waiting for a response. The girl threw out a dry phrase, hoping that in the future her father would change his decision. The chimes started ringing when the office door slammed shut. Alexander Hades was sitting at the table. He leaned wearily on his head and didn't touch the work emails again as he stepped into the hallway. Kana leaned tiredly against the office door, too drained to move forward. From the back of the hallway, a voice sounded that the girl hoped she would never hear again. Isabel approached the one Kana. Nothing would help them get rid of her. The woman got up from the couch and decided to leave the room, justifying. Hadn't seen since the incident with Lucy's illness. But instead of the girl, Kana's attention was caught by the envelope Isabel was holding in her hand. Isabel didn't know what reaction to expect from her sister, so she kept her distance. Kana didn't want this meeting, but now she couldn't run away. Isabel was surprised to see Kana in their father's office, a place the children rarely accessed. Kana feared that her sister had told her about Lucy's poisoning when approaching Isabel. Kana murmured with irony that she could always turn her worst fears into reality, so she hoped she had learned the lesson. Isabel had been threatened, so she couldn't say anything. However, before Kana left the hallway, the girl turned around and pressed the envelope against her chest. The message was nicely packaged, but inside was an invitation from the imperial family. Isabel smiled with disdain. It didn't even bother her that Kana had received the invitation to the second princess's birthday party. For the Hades family, it was just a formality. Pushing Kana, her sister mocked her, saying that anyway, she wouldn't have the guts to go to the event since she was still the subject of ridicule in the aristocratic world. Kana snatched the envelope from her sister's hands, that she was too tired of the disturbances and shouting. Isabel tried to stop the woman, but she was already heading for the door. She didn't care much about her few words. Isabel took the silence as a victory and bragged again that, unlike Kana, she could show her face proudly in public. The girl claimed she would always be Alexander Hades' favorite daughter, no matter what action she took. Then she turned and headed to her room, telling Kana not to cross the allowed boundaries. Several months passed, but the people in this property remained the same. They wanted to see Kana as the girl, cornered and unable to defend herself. Kana smiled with satisfaction at her conclusions. She wouldn't let the rules of this property dominate her. As a child, when Kana got her own lab, she began spending a lot of time studying alchemy. She didn't want to spend much time at home. It was easier for her to hide in the basement and go unnoticed. Alchemy was an innate gift of Kana. That's why she worked hard to use that knowledge to extract magic from mana stones. It requires innate skills. When Kana conducted the experiment to resurrect the flower, she understood that alchemy would be tied to her life forever. At that moment, the girl was still full of hopes, claiming it was too late and she needed to rest forcefully. Taking Isabel's hand, the woman dragged her along so she wouldn't do something stupid, eager to receive praise for her achievements, but her father demanded that she stop experimenting. That day, Kana promised that no one would know her talent. Otherwise, her father threatened to shut down the lab. In another life, as Liu Huakana managed to fulfill her dreams of a happy life, there she had no father, so she was free to pursue her desires. However, forgetting the past was reckless. Her father would never stop hating her, so she shouldn't entertain illusions that her achievements mattered to him. Kana didn't rush to leave the hallway. The pain of betrayal from her own forgetfulness in the office tormented her. She gripped the envelope with the invitation and, furious, threw it to the ground. She couldn't contain her breakdown and began shouting insults against her father, who was a psychopath that enjoyed torturing his daughter. The plan had failed. She couldn't leave the estate or get a divorce, so she, like never before, wanted to return to Li Yuhua's body. After calming down, she sat on the floor of the hallway. She couldn't keep living like a rat in the basement, so she had to come up with a new plan. The main goal remained the divorce, after which Kana could leave and start the life she had when she was... The daughter resisted, uncomfortably promising to stay in Lucy's room to keep an eye on her health. Li Yuhua. She had a dream to open a hospital in her name. Maybe the place in the body had changed, but that's what she worked hard for years for. Kana headed to the basement, turned on a lamp to check the lab records. She might not return to another world, but she always needed to have a plan in case she had to rebuild her life on the Western continent. By gathering all the notes, Kana understood that Isabel had given her a new opportunity to achieve the divorce. The invitation to the second princess's birthday was a perfect excuse to make her presence known. After all, at such an event, the most famous and influential aristocrats of the empire would gather. Kana looked at herself in the mirror. Her aristocratic status couldn't be denied. She was simply the Duchess Valen of the Adis family, though her name hadn't yet received compliments. The name of someone stripped of hostess status. According to rumors, Kana Hadis was a woman degraded to the level of servitude and deprived of the splendor her husband had access to. It's time to get rid of the bad reputation. Now people shouldn't fear her hair and black eyes, just because they were a sign of sin. Now is the time for Kana Hades to become a lady. Although now she feared that Kana would say something inappropriate if Isabel happened to leave the room, whom others would fear to look at not because of bad rumors, but because of her superiority over others. Someone knocked on the lab door, catching the young woman off guard. Kaylin entered the room. He had heard rumors about her father's refusal to approve Kana's divorce. The sister advised the brother to take care of their father himself, since he couldn't kick her out of the house while the order from their dad was still in effect. Kaylin was annoyed that the sister planned to spend all her time in the basement and offered to help her move the lab upstairs. The brother's concern pleased her. He insisted that she change the place so she wouldn't hide in dirty rooms. But from her past, she clearly remembered that any interest from her brother in her matters was just a mask. At any moment, he could throw a verbal punch that would destroy all her hopes of getting closer. Even in the past, he had personally advised her not to go upstairs and to spend all her time in the basement. Remembering past events, the young woman abruptly told her brother not to come down to her basement without important news. Then they would have the chance to improve their relationship. Kaylin tried to reach out to his sister, but Kana was annoyed by his attempts to call her sister. So he reminded her again of their agreement to only use names. The poison that bubbled in the girl's chest came to light. The door closed behind the mother, but Caleb asked his sister to follow the woman. Isabel tried to appeal to compassion, but she recommended that Kaylin call her the Duchess of Valentino if her name was unpleasant to him. The boy wasn't stupid. He understood the message that they had no intention of talking to him, so he proposed to make a new deal. But the boy didn't have a proposal, so he started to improvise, indicating to Kana that he could still take care of Lucy. The girl didn't like that conversation. She decided that Kaylin was implying that he didn't trust her. But the boy asked his sister to pay attention to the fact that Lucy's health problems would be constant due to pressure from other family members. Lucy couldn't completely relax, so her paralysis symptoms could reappear. Kana knew beforehand that she resembled Lucy, but when Kaylin expressed it, he put her in a dilemma. The brother proposed creating a remedy that would keep Lucy's mind and body in shape since she could hide the pain she felt. The brother promised to pay any price that would convince Kana to take care of Lucy. The silence stretched on as Kaylin waited for his sister's conditions. After evaluating the options, Kana set a price of 2,000 gold coins, a significant amount even for aristocrats, threatened that he wouldn't ask again, and that tone made Kana smile with satisfaction. She noticed that her sister had been acting suspiciously lately. The brother's response came immediately. He accepted the payment. The promptness of the response surprised the girl. He clarified that he needed gold coins and not silver. He couldn't understand why he was trying so hard to please her. The boy assured his sister that the price didn't matter to him. They would pay any other price that Kana set. Accepting the situation, Kana asked her brother for a maid with good skills and a strong character. Cullen's generosity was useful. However, Kana doubted he would meet her conditions. They would pay any other one that Kana said, accepting the situation. Kana asked her brother for a maid with good skills and strong character. Cullen's generosity was useful. However, Kana doubted he would meet her conditions. Although she once saw how Cullen was willing to do anything Lucy asked him in the girl's mind, doubt arose about whether Cullen would do something similar before. But there was no way to get an answer, so she reached out to him in an incomprehensible gesture. After thinking it over, Kana announced that from now on, Cullen would be her companion at the banquet. A few days passed for the second princess's birthday, and Kana hoped that Cullen, now she was interested in what she was hiding. Approaching her brother, Kana asked him not to kick Isabel out, would give up since attending a banquet with an exile would be humiliating for him. Although after the agreement, they signed a pact. This didn't guarantee anything. Meanwhile, Kana didn't know exactly what the guy was planning. But she wasn't going to back down from the pact. She intended to make the most of Cullen's opportunities to get what she needed for her new plan. Kana now had a new maid named Reca, a result of one of the points of the pact. The maid was very cheerful. Sometimes this made Kana think she was too naive to work in the Duke's palace. The girl sat in front of the mirror wanting to test the maid's skills and haircuts, so she decided to change the length of her bangs. The maid started the cut, carefully removing the excess hair while Kana gave her instructions. Observing the work, Kana decided to try techniques from her previous life. When the maid finished the cut, Kana praised her for the good result, which made her blush. But suddenly panic seized Reca. She trembled and started apologizing. When she calmed down, the girl confessed that she didn't expect gratitude. Now she wanted to reveal a big deception that Isabel was hiding. Without waiting for Isabel's reaction, Kana addressed the maid again. This brought a genuine smile to Kana's face. The day of the banquet arrived, and Orsini and Isabel entered Cullen's room. Surprised by the news that her brother would accompany her to the date, Isabel didn't understand how her brother could lower himself like that in front of a sister, whom even the other aristocrats didn't respect. Orsini was furious. He tried to convince Kaylin how much his reputation would fall if he decided to appear in society alongside an exile. Kaylin disagreed with his brother, but he found it amusing, since he would have never thought of attending an event with someone marked by family shame. For a moment, Orsini tried to imagine the attitude, but his pride prevented him. Isabel also agreed with her brother. She didn't want to participate in events with Kana. Orsini made a decision. He and Isabel would attend the banquet separately from Caleb. Caleb didn't care about the family's suggestions. He decided to spend the day with his other sister. Making a disdainful gesture, Orsini headed for the exit. He didn't want to worry about his brother's reputation if he wasn't even bothering to do so. Isabel followed him. One of the guards grabbed her and threw her over his shoulder to take her out of Lucy's room. Kana was hanging upside down. Her position was unfavorable. To find out what harmful food Lucy might have eaten. Isabel didn't calm down, even now that Kana continued with the questioning. But before that, she managed to give Caleb a sardonic smile. The echo of the door slamming resonated through the room. Caleb waited for his sister. He hadn't seen her in 2 weeks since she had been hiding. In the palace quarters, Lucy's treatment was progressing according to the contract. However, due to her academic and work obligations, Kaylin couldn't see Kana a few times he ran into Reca, but she was too busy with her tasks. So So Kaylin decided that if he started investigating Kana's life, she would become even colder towards him. Kaylin assumed his sister was intentionally avoiding him, but knowing her new character, that behavior wasn't typical of her. Especially now that he had started to worry about her mood was constantly improving. Probably at that moment in the lab when they were about to sign a new contract, it awakened a feeling of guilt in him. At that moment, he felt uncomfortable, as if only guilt was pulling him towards his sister. But maybe it wasn't just guilt. Past actions deserve sincere regret. The boy pushed those thoughts away, hoping the maid had enough common sense to stay quiet. Suddenly, Caleb also addressed the maid. He didn't need memories. Now he had to focus on the upcoming evening since his sister needed nothing from him. So he shouldn't wish for anything in return. The boy decided that all his ambivalent feelings would disappear once the shared evening was over. Kana appeared in the room. Kaylin noticed her approach, but what he saw shocked him. The girl extended her hand when she got up from the couch. The boy was fascinated and reached out his palm towards Kana's hand without hesitation. As he took the girl's hand, he tried to control his emotions, but his face didn't hide his admiration. In the past few weeks, Kana had dedicated a lot of time to preparing for dinner, hence her dress. It followed the style of the world she lived in, like Li Yu. The red and black tones of the dress looked incredible on her, and she knew it. That's why tonight she wouldn't be the scared Kana Hades, but would present herself to the aristocrats as the proud Duchess of Valentino. Kaylin was surprised to see his sister, so he didn't even catch the question she asked as she approached. The girl asked him again if the scent of the perfume she was wearing suited her well, and asked her to help Kana uncover the truth, which left Isabel in shock. After calming down, the maid reported that all the food. Only on the second occasion did the boy realize that the floral scent emanating from her was unique. Kaylin gave her a compliment, as was fitting for an aristocrat, but Kana noticed a slight confusion on his face. The last few days she had spent in the lab recreating the perfume she used when she was in Li Yuhua's body. The effect the fragrances had on Caleb pleased her, since even in another world the perfume made an impression. Without wasting more time, the girl headed towards the exit of the room, grabbing her brother by the arm, taking him with her, since from that moment began the time Kaylin had to spend accompanying his sister. The situation was new for Kaylin, and he was excited. He almost called her sister, but remembered in time his agreement. Isabella Dyes arrived at the imperial banquet before anyone else, so she managed to infiltrate the princess's room to complain about Kana's imminent visit. She knew that the princess had wanted to meet Kana for a long time, so she didn't miss the opportunity to tell. Some rumors the banquet had started a while ago, however, before Isabel's arrival, had been prepared according to the menu, and Lucy hadn't eaten any other dishes. However, a day after eating, Princess Lillian spent her time drinking tea alone. She had held a grudge against Kana for a long time, because it was she who married Duke Valentino, to prevent her from marrying the emperor's daughter. But during the 7 years of marriage, Kana never attended events where Lillian could see her. The princess knew that the marriage between Sylvan and Kana was decided by agreements, but it was surprising that the duke's wife finally decided to appear in public. Isabel approached the terrace, but Lillian watched her closely. Since many knew the rumors about Addis's family relations and the few occasions when Kana attended events, she always hid from prying eyes, and her family members pretended not to be her relatives. Lillian's attitude towards Kana Valentino was based on rumors and discussions. That's why in her eyes the Duchess of Valentino always seemed despicable and helpless. Isabel shouted, attracting the princess's attention, who found the tea more interesting than the birthday celebration. Whispers reached the princess's terrace, and while Isabel was furious, Lillian was preparing to meet Kana, the arrival of Kana at the banquet accompanied by Kaylin. Lucy drank a tea that according to her tasted different from the previous one. Kana asked the maid to bring the tea Lucy had taken, caused a stir among the aristocrats, who could not believe that the Duchess of Valentino had appeared at the event. However, the young woman and her brother walked proudly among the guests, ignoring the conversations about her black hair. Now it was time for new rumors in the aristocratic world, since the young woman of stunning beauty bore no resemblance to the helpless Kana Hades. The Duchess of Valentino passed by them proudly and confidently, but not at all scared or despised the princess. Lillian watched the couple's parade from the terrace, but did not rush to comment on what she saw while Isabel was terrified by the new rumors that would soon attack her. The princess examined Kana calmly. Many young aristocrats began to talk about the beauty of the Duchess of Valentino, ignoring anything else the young woman noticed. Lustful looks towards her, but everything continued as expected. However, it bothered her that Kaylin did not step away. Even though the time of accompaniment had long since ended, the young woman signaled to her brother that the agreement was fulfilled. But he wouldn't stop looking at the crowd and refused to let go. The boy took his sister to the farthest table and answered evasively. But now, Isabel was terrified that Kana would guess something was wrong with the herbs. To all her questions about his behavior while offering her a glass of wine, Kaylin kept his attention fixed on her, which irritated Kana even more, since as long as he was by her side, she couldn't carry out her plan. Kana noticed that since she arrived at the banquet, Princess Lillian had not stopped watching her, and all her scheme had been designed for her to meet the girl who desired Sylvia and Balin. But as long as Kaylin was beside her, he couldn't get close to the princess, and didn't know how to shake off his brother's sudden attention. Among the crowd of guests in this recap manhwa, a kind voice was heard its owner expressing surprise at seeing Kaylin at the banquet as a young man made his way through the group of aristocrats. He was babbling nonsense just to get closer and shower the girl with compliments. While the stranger tried to be nice, Kana was taken aback by his pretense of not knowing her, as all the guests knew she was next to Kaylin. The stranger introduced himself as Colin, and the girl immediately understood his intentions. Since he was only interested in her for her looks behind the noble's kind words, she clearly heard the subtext. She hadn't expected, even though Isabel claimed that only an expert could verify the authenticity of the tea. The maid brought the tray with the utensil and the tea box to see such beauty after all the rumors about her ugliness. Colin got so close that he took her hand. He started convincing her to meet again after the banquet, but suddenly the aristocrat's wrist was caught in a tight grip from another hand, making her scream. Keelan was furious. He yanked Colin away from his sister while the latter tried to justify that he had no hidden motives in approaching the girl. Keelan didn't care about the false excuses. He warned the guy that he should return to his fiancée. Keelan's face burned with rage. He decided to take Colin to the garden himself, where he would spend the rest of the evening with his future wife. He shoved the aristocrat forward and followed behind him. While Kaina watched the conflict, she didn't understand her brother's violent rejection of the approaches toward her. Keelan shielded his sister from Colin's gaze and kept pushing the guy toward the exit. However, when he turned around for a moment, Keelan asked Kaina to stay and promised to return soon. Kaina silently watched the boys leave, but she wished Keelan and his friend would stay in the garden until the end of the party. She wasn't in the mood to play family games since she had little time to get to know Princess Lillian. Looking towards the balcony, everyone sat around the little table where the maid placed the tray, so Kaina began to examine the girl. Kaina noticed that the princess was no longer there, which meant she had to make the first move before the two met. The brief wait ended when behind Kaina the voice of Princess Lillian rang out. Her Majesty weaved through the crowd of guests and headed towards Kaina with her head held high, gathering strength. Kaina smiled charmingly and greeted Princess Lillian. She showed no emotions, but Kaina knew that today she had to ensure the princess would be on her side as an ally. Everyone knew that Princess Lillian had chosen Duke Valentino as her husband, and her influence wouldn't allow Sylvian to refuse the wedding. As the matter progressed toward the wedding, Sylvian decided to join Kaina, and his influence prevented Sylvian from refusing to marry while the matter moved toward the wedding. Sylvian decided to join Kaina through a contract to avoid marrying the princess, even though Kaina had stolen the princess's husband after the marriage. Sylvian had not met Lillian even once. The meetings attended by Duke Valentino were always held solely in the presence of the Duke, without his wife. With each new banquet or dinner without the Duke's wife, more resentment arose in Lillian's heart. She took the jar where the tea leaves were stored, spilled the leaves onto the table. Caleb noticed that the tea, because she couldn't understand what was so special about Kaina, Addis, and now that Kaina Valentino had arrived herself at the banquet in honor of the birth. Lillian didn't know what to do. The princess reluctantly acknowledged that Addis was the only one among all the guests at the dinner, with whom she wanted to get acquainted. Addis's courtesy didn't impress Lillian, who declared he wasn't a man, over whom feminine charm could work. The princess's frankness surprised Addis, but it was better this way, since both could be clear about their goals. With enthusiasm, Lillian pointed with her fan, hiding a smile, since she understood the game Addis had started. Without wasting time, Lillian declared that Addis had stolen what was appropriate for her. Not having conquered Sylvian, Lillian demanded an answer about why Addis Hades started the whole game with his wedding. The princess's mood changed. She hinted that she wouldn't tolerate Addis, trying to evade the truth. Addis still hadn't responded, but how the princess interpreted the subtext of her actions impressed the young Addis, who stated she attended the banquet for her husband, smelled strong and had a lot of lavender leaves. Examining the small petals of the flower, Kaina understood that this herb, since the rumors about her indifference toward her wife surely reached the princess's ears. Lillian had been paying attention to the Duke's situation for a long time. Some aristocrats shared that Duke Valentino was very distant with his wife. Lillian reminded Addis that relationships in the Valentino family have always been tense, but the young woman replied that no change in the Duke's character should be expected. The princess smiled. Sylvian's character didn't bother her. She even considered it a unique masculine charm. Addis felt uncomfortable with that carefree attitude toward the Duke. It would surely lead the princess to trouble. The young woman chose to get straight to the point, declaring she was tired of her husband's indifference. After that, Addis began to play the role of a worn-out wife, for after so many years of cold relations, she no longer had the necessary confidence to continue with the marriage. The princess didn't rush to feel happy. She patiently scrutinized the Duchess's words, like a snake. But when she stated she had returned to her family home and the divorce had become complicated, and now resistance was useless, Kaylin had had enough of the circus his sister was putting on. Hadn't been prepared according to the recipe she had made while holding the leaves up to the light, something the aristocrat found hard to overcome. Addis perceived the evident interest in Lillian's eyes, so she insisted on convincing her that for her, the honor of the Addis family was the most important. That's why the Duke of Hades didn't approve the divorce. But now that the marriage couldn't be saved, Addis tried to employ any method. Princess Lillian listened attentively to the Duchess's words. She even stopped waving her fan. Addis had several options to pressure the princess. She could spread rumors about the husband's infidelity and his inclination to cheat, or if I decided to act and recover Sylvia and Valentine, I could use the imperial family status to pressure the Duke of Hades after waiting. A moment for the princess to process the information, Kaina proposed an agreement that would allow Lillian to have Sylvian back. However, the princess noticed that Kaina was trying to deceive her, so she gave a mocking smile. Kina understood that with a few more arguments. The princess would agree, for her eyes lit up upon hearing about the divorce process. The young woman was about to announce a new proposal when the rapid clicking of women's shoes echoed in the banquet hall. Countess Elister, she noticed among the petals some unknown flowers. Isabel laughed ironically, saying that not everyone dies, arrived breathless at the corner where Lillian and Kena were demanding to know what the conversation was about. After calming down, the woman picked up a glass of wine and prepared to wait for the answer. But her arrival irritated Kena, since she always came at the worst time. The princess decided to verify that Kena was not lying. So she narrated her story to the countess, without mentioning the divorce. The countess, Elister, confirmed the daughter-in-law's words, but clarified that it was she who expelled Kena from the castle. Valentine's confident tone infuriated Kena, as she did not have the courage to throw her out of the castle. But now, looking into the eyes of Princess Josephine, she tried to proclaim her rank as the owner. To distract Princess Josephine, she began to laugh and accused Kena of trying to get Sylvian's attention by performing silly acts. The countess's words calmed Lillian, who became convinced that Kena, who so desperately wanted to marry the Duke, would never request a divorce, and that the situation of returning to the family estate was nothing but a game. Now Lillian recalled how once her maid brought her a rumor that Kena was kneeling begging for attention from her husband. The rumors reached the aristocratic world directly from the Valentino Palace, after drinking tea with lavender leaves. Isabel began to praise the flavor of the tea, so Lucy must have simply made a mistake in tasting it. So with each repetition, they became more and more outrageous due to the actions of the Duke's wife. The princess understood that Kena had been trying for a while to attract the Duke's gaze, even going so far as to use the imperial family. Valentino was playing with the princess, and her fascination for Sylvian turning her into a puppet in her hands. At one point, the young woman invented many unnecessary facts, but in her mind persevered the idea that she would not allow anyone to manipulate her. Kena did not like the direction of the meeting, although she found it entertaining that despite the high expectations, the princess turned out to be foolish. Before Kena could correct the princess, a glass of wine flew in her direction. The liquid splattered everywhere, but Kena noticed the furious expression on the princess's face. After realizing what she had done, Kena looked down at her dress as the princess walked away from her. Josephine remained still. Her face reflected a mix of surprise and shock at the princess's rude behavior. Drops of red liquid ran down Kena's dress, staining all the fabric up to the hem. Lillian threw the glass aside and dryly assured that it had all been accidental. Isabel adopted a new plan. Now she had to pretend convincingly that she understood while separating the leaves in the glass, and that she was deeply sorry. Kena adjusted her dress a bit, letting the last drops of wine fall. But she didn't cause a scene. Turning to the princess, Kena smiled sweetly and reassured the girl, for she herself had seen how the princess's hand slipped. Josephina didn't dare to intervene in the conversation. She couldn't believe that Kena was so reckless as to not realize the obvious provocation from the princess. Lillian was entertained by the girl's submission, not getting a response the first time. She reached for another glass of wine, directing it toward Kena. Lillian flashed a smile and commented that she was ready for another surprise. And before it happened, the Duchess of Valentine needed to answer a question. Suddenly, a scream cut through the banquet hall where a woman demanded to know the reason for the commotion at the social event. Kena and Lillian fell silent instantly. Her scandal had put them in a bad light, right in front of everyone. For at that moment, the Empress of the Western continent was approaching them with a slow but determined step. Kena was trying to identify what kind of herbs the strange ones were. She placed the can. The invited aristocrat stepped aside to not disturb the lady who stopped next to the girls, and awaited an answer to her question. The woman's face reflected demand. She was not willing to let a dispute between young ladies ruin the celebration. Kena watched as Lillian abruptly hid the glass of wine behind her back to conceal her actions from the Empress. It took the princess a few seconds to react, but under the woman's gaze she panicked. Kena understood that she needed to flee, as it was likely the Empress was aware of all the conversations at the banquet. But suddenly, an idea struck Kena, and she decided to take advantage of the Empress's attention for her own purposes. So without waiting, she let out a sob. Kena shed a few tears and began to apologize for being the cause of the scandal at the celebration. Lillian and Josephina were surprised by Kena's sudden change in attitude, as now before them she seemed like a completely different person. Countess Elister, feeling her strength, began to scream and accuse Kena of how an aristocrat shouldn't behave pitifully on the table, and announced that she doubted the authenticity of the tea. Isabel suddenly forgot all her arguments. Now she was closer to failure than ever. The Empress ordered the Countess to be quiet. Then she approached Kena, while the woman behind her was in a panic over the lady's behavior. In the next moment, the Empress embraced Kena with maternal affection and allowed her to cry in silence. For Kena, such an act was unexpected, but to not stop crying and ruin the charade, she began to apologize on the woman's shoulder, not holding back her tears any longer. Lillian watched in disgust as the scene unfolded before her, but she couldn't protest in any way while the Emperor's wife. With the princess present, she didn't expect that precisely she would be the final person, to whom the woman would accuse for the argument. Then the Empress fixed her gaze on Lillian and threatened that the second princess should be more sensitive and polite. The woman had always compared the princesses. Now she suggested that Lillian needed to work hard to match the kind character of the first princess, while the Empress scolded Lillian. Kana wiped her tears, but the atmosphere felt very confusing. Princess Lillian was the daughter of a concubine, Jumping from her chair, she slammed her hands on the table and accused Kana of making up nonsense. That's why in the Empress's eyes, she always behaved worse than the first princess, even though the Empress had allowed scoldings before. Directed at Lillian before they didn't occur in a public place, Lillian understood the threat in the woman's words. Now she had to be much more careful and not lose control. Even if Kana Hades was near the crowd, a young woman came out. She approached Lillian and hugged her, trying to soften the situation. Finding herself in her mother's arms, Lillian calmed down, allowing her to calm the Empress herself. Kana needed a moment to realize who that woman was, although she hadn't had contact with her before most popular works from the Western continent told. The story of an imperial concubine who reached that status coming from a very poor family. While observing Teresa and knowing Kana, she sensed a special strength emanating from the woman, as even in difficult situations, she maintained calmness and courtesy towards the Empress. Perhaps the concubine's words convinced the Empress that Lillian wouldn't show rudeness again, but still the woman stopped shouting, holding Kana by the arm as she headed to the stairs. Taking a spoonful of the tea, she decided to divert suspicion elsewhere, offering it to her brother, asking Teresita to supervise her promises about the behavior of the second princess, leaving the surprise guest behind. The Empress hugged the young woman and invited her to have tea together. Knowing the palace well, the Empress led Kana through the farthest halls so she wouldn't hear the new rumors filling the banquet hall. The sudden concern alerted her, so she had to understand the Empress's hidden plans, since she had taken her to the most secluded room in the residence. The butler opened the doors when the lady invited Kana to enter the room for a private conversation, letting the Empress pass. The young woman paused for a moment at the threshold. Now the party was no longer boring for her, but she wasn't ready to play in the imperial games before attending the banquet. Kana spent a lot of time in the lab with Ray. During their joint work, the young woman learned from the maid that since they introduced control over medicinal herbs in the capital, she hadn't practiced medicine. The alarming thing was that everyone who cultivated herbs received the label of charlatans who refused to obey the first princess suddenly, asking him to smell it and say if it differed from the tea they always drank before Caleb. Memories came flooding back to Kana as the Empress led her to the room where a young girl was waiting. On the couch shrouded in shadow sat a girl whose face was hidden behind a dark veil. According to the Empress, this was the first princess of Aslan Amelia. The princess did not react when Kana politely introduced herself. She bowed and glanced at the princess out of the corner of her eye. Now she understood the Empress had come personally to fetch her from the party. Many questions flooded Kana's mind, but she remembered the bandage on Lucy's face during their first meeting and realized that the only reason to hide the princess's face could be due to a skin disease. The ladies settled around the table as the maids brought them herbal tea. The Empress was straightforward. She knew about Lucy's treatment and wanted to learn more about the new remedies. Kana was on high alert. All information regarding Lucy's treatment was a secret of the Addis family, so the Empress shouldn't know even the smallest details. Noticing the unease in the young woman's eyes, the Empress encouraged her and advised her not to feel intimidated. He would respond and put the leaves in her hand, suggesting she check the tea for herself. While Kaylin examined the tea, the Empress confessed that it was Chloe Addis herself who had told her about Kana's treatment methods, and that information was a surprise to her. She knew that Chloe Addis never acted without a purpose, so the recommendations regarding Kana's skills could be a trap. But suddenly she realized that all of this was a provocation, and that the Empress had been luring her into a trap from the start. If she refuses to treat Princess Amelia right now, her peaceful life is likely to end. If she accepts but fails in the treatment, she will be labeled a fraud, and Lucy will also face trouble for complicity in the deception. After weighing her options, Kana was reluctant to admit that she had merit in Lucy's treatment, although she kept silent about the possibilities of curing the princess. For the Empress, it was enough that the rumors turned out to be true. Turning to her daughter, the woman ordered her to remove the bandage from her face. The princess did not move from her spot. Her body was tense, but the Empress did not wish to wait and demanded that she show her face. Tension arose between mother and daughter. The young girl refused to remove the veil, which deeply angered the Empress. He approached the guard in this recap Manhwa, ordering him to stop immediately. Isabel hadn't counted on her brother's intervention, so she couldn't react in time. Isabel turned her attention to the maid and demanded that she smell the remedy. Kaylin observed the lavender flowers, and after inspecting them, without further discussion, Princess Amelia yanked the cloth off, causing surprise on Kana's face. In her anger, the princess waved the cloth, and even from the shadows of the room, strange stains could be seen on her face. Upon closer inspection, Kana noticed that the stains had a reddish tint, and the skin around them was peeling. It turned out that the old rumors about the first princess's incurable illness were true. There were many theories about the young woman's ailment, but among the aristocrats, they all agreed that an incurable disease was growing within her body. The Empress explained that numerous doctors have not been able to completely cure her, and recently the symptoms have worsened. Kana was the woman's last hope, but without a complete body examination. She couldn't judge whether the illness was curable. The Empress urged the young woman for the examination, but Princess Amelia didn't like this decision. Amelia had already removed the veil, so that should be enough for a medical assessment. It was evident that her own appearance disgusted her. That's why she reacted so aggressively to the examination, but the Empress ordered the young woman to undress and show all the spots on her body. Did not hesitate to confirm that the tea was ordinary. The maid stammered, assuring that she only sensed the aroma of lavender and nothing else, an order that left her frozen. Kana felt uncomfortable witnessing such treatment towards the princess, but she didn't want her to take off her clothes now. A deathly silence reigned in the room, and the princess was embarrassed by the Empress's order. She didn't know how to act, biting her teeth as the princess tried to contain her urge to insult her mother. But that didn't last long, and the next second she asked the empress with a sarcastic shout what else she would have to do after having shown herself like a half-naked clown in a dark room. Kana hadn't participated in the conversation. Family relations didn't concern her, but she felt compassion for Amelia. Emotions took the lead as the princess in a fit of argument suggested going out without a veil to the banquet hall, so that not only Kana would laugh at her appearance, but all the guests at the event. The impulsive behavior irritated the empress. Since the skin disease spread throughout the body, which meant that an examination was necessary, the princess began to act childishly and reject the examination. But when she got tired of arguing, she claimed she wouldn't show her body to the duchess. These arguments convinced Isabel to resume the fight against Kana and start celebrating her victory. The young woman, at that moment, so her mother could stop insisting on it. Kana didn't know how long she had been among the imperial family, but she was already feeling nauseous from the shouting. Although she understood the princess's feelings, excessive impulsivity definitely wouldn't help in the treatment of her past life. Kana remembered how sensitive patients could be, since the illness caused them fear, but those who care for the patient are also exposed to that fear. So understanding the empress's aggressive behavior is also understandable. Although the imperial family situation was excessively emotional if she was there, it was probably her last hope for healing. Suddenly the empress lost control and began cursing everything. Since in aristocratic society they considered her a mother who had given birth to a decaying corpse. Because Amelia's illness had not relented for years, although Kana understood that the empress now treated her like a daughter, and then paid attention to her rank as the first princess, but the words about the decaying corpse cooled her enthusiasm. Managed to convince the others that the band's tea now didn't even have to be replicated by Kana. In light of the growing general security, she threw the veil to the ground and apologized for making her mother worry about rumors that could lead to her dying. The empress didn't value her daughter's words, who was now acting driven by emotions that both struggled to contain. All the conflict stemmed from each party's personal discontent. Now Amelia felt hurt because her mother called her a rotting corpse. Laughing hysterically, the princess asked her mother to be honest and begged her to die faster than the time they would waste looking for a remedy. Kana silently observed the argument. The princess couldn't calm down and began to list methods of suicide for the empress to choose the right one. The woman stood up from the couch. She was fed up with her daughter's screams and threatened to punish her if she kept acting disdainfully and saying nonsense. The situation was too negative. That's why Kana caught the empress's attention to express her point of view. At this moment, there were no medical instruments for examination, so they should consider another time and place sweetly smiling Kana. Isabel interpreted the silence as a victory and arrogantly announced that she would personally go to the father to ask him to expel Kana, promised that she would soon visit the imperial palace herself, where she could perform all the procedures. The empress calmed down. She just had to accept the proposal, so she didn't hold Kana any longer. The woman accompanied Kana to the door, who wanted to return to the banquet and still needed time to think. Before returning to the palace, upon reaching the hallway, the young woman was able to exhale calmly. Being a witness to others' arguments drained her deeply. She assumed that after her departure, the conflict in the hall would continue, but it would become even more intense. Kana didn't know how many times the princess could argue with her mother, but the reality was that after each conflict, the hope in Amelia's heart dimmed. Turning towards the hall door, the young woman heard muffled shouting, a sign that the argument was indeed still going on. After staying a moment by the door, Kana listened to the shouts until she heard the princess crying. Then the young woman left the hallway and found a balcony where no music or other voices could be heard. Too much had happened in one night. She wasn't used to such parties. So now, from the castle, since she had entered deceiving Kana, hoped Isabel would admit her mistake. But now that she was caught in lies, her head was starting to hurt from the overload. The first plan to reach an agreement with the second princess failed, but she had an ace up her sleeve. And if she played it right, the treatment for the first princess still had chances of reaching Lillian. Also, getting close to the empress would be a good opportunity for her reputation, because when she left the hallway, she couldn't help but notice one detail. All the aristocrats who attended the party looked at her differently. Her first impression no longer caused them admiration. Now in their eyes there was no sympathy, and no one dared to approach her first. It was evident that behind that behavior lay an inexhaustible interest in her person. And if she managed to cure Amelia, that would add more points to his reputation. In his thoughts, he didn't notice a guy had entered quietly onto her balcony. Only the slight creak of footsteps made her turn and spot Orsini slowly approaching her. In an instant, she was stunned. She didn't want any new conflicts that night. But Orsini's expression was strange. She had no intention of forgiving her. Isabel pretended to be nice, perfectly playing. He didn't seem willing to yell at her. He was just watching her with interest. Kana thought her brother had dared so much that without looking, if there were strangers on the balcony, he was ready to argue with her. The guy stepped closer to the railing and politely apologized for not expecting to find someone outside so late. Suddenly, the guy smiled and complimented her, amazed by her beauty and shocked to run into her. Kana was taken aback. The way her brother lowered his voice and the compliments didn't fit in her mind, and she decided she had definitely lost her sanity. Looking over her bangs at the guy, the girl understood that he definitely didn't recognize her. So he was behaving so uninhibitedly, the girl wasn't rushing to start a conversation. But that didn't stop him, and he started to show his sensual nature again. Noticing that tonight was beautiful, he stared at her, waiting for some kind of response. Kana was still holding her hand against her face. The idea that her brother didn't recognize her relaxed her, but she didn't want to reveal all her cards too soon. The emotions inside the young woman were stirring. The compliment that she was a beautiful lady made her nauseous, but probably her brother. The role of someone who would never hurt her little sister. The young woman immersed herself in her triumph, had fallen for the illusion that under the nightlight, her black hair was just a lighter shade. Kaina didn't believe that Orsini was prone to such stupid conclusions, and not recognizing the hair and eyes of his sister whom he despised so much was an incredible event. Suddenly, the young woman came up with an idea. She could take advantage of her brother's situation and play a heavy prank on him. So with a light laugh, she accepted his compliment. The guy got excited, even though, of course, he had already been nice to other girls before. This one had made a deep impression on him, and her interest in him was a big achievement for Orsini. Kaina tried to tone down the guy's enthusiasm. She stepped away from his excessive gallantry and confessed that she wasn't used to so many compliments since she attended social events very rarely. Lifting her spirits, Kaina stated that her visit today was an exception, but not even. This party turned out to be the right place for her. Orsini noticed they were very similar, since he also hated those kinds of events. But Kaina caught the lie. Since all Orsini liked was drinking and having fun, the guy decided to interest the girl and suggested, without realizing how calm Kaina was, who now anticipated that she would never allow her to return to the castle again. Suddenly, taking a walk together in the garden, the longer Orsini spent without realizing the trick, the more entertained Kaina became, so she couldn't miss the chance to walk together. She couldn't believe that all the guy's logic went to hell at the sight of a beautiful face. But that would be her revenge. Holding the boy's hand, the girl decided that when she found out the truth, her heart would fall into colossal despair. Because the woman he had despised for years turned out to be the same one he had just filled with compliments. At such a late hour, the garden was a deserted place. That's why Kaina and Orsini didn't find anyone on their way. However, this didn't prevent the glances from the palace when Duke Valentino from the balcony with a friend watched the young girl stroll. Argon, the first prince of the empire, pointed out that it was Silvino. He didn't care that someone was walking with his wife on a night stroll. The prince was sure it was exactly the duke's wife. Because he remembered her dress, Kaina's image was unforgettable, so he couldn't stop watching the young girl from the balcony. He knew that Duke Valentino had recently arrived at the banquet. Kaina told Isabel to stop being so excited, which left her stunned. Isabel's absurd attempts to justify herself, and hadn't seen his wife accompanied by Caleb. However, he couldn't understand how the Duke could be so cold in front of such beauty. Diverting his gaze from the garden, the prince commented to the Duke that he had problems if he didn't see beauty in his wife. Suddenly, the prince's words brought to Duke Valentino's mind the night after the wedding. When Kaina stealthily entered his bedroom at that moment, the girl was very modest. However, how she insisted on fulfilling her wifely duty surprised the Duke a little. That night, he understood that he was indifferent to his wife, which is why he didn't let her stay in his room. The prince's voice interrupted the man's memories, who without remorse commented that he would definitely prefer a young woman like Kaina. Directing one last glance at the garden, Argon admitted that he didn't identify who the young girl left with, although from the stranger's polite manners, he knew the couple planned to enjoy some time alone. The prince was interested in the Duke's reaction, although he drank wine in silence. Deep down, he knew he wasn't indifferent to who his wife went with. Argon smiled when the Duke looked at him, but he didn't say more than a comment about Silviana's wedding. The stroll with Orsini turned out to be prolonged. The brother demanded that he stop this disaster immediately before it was too late. Kaina didn't appreciate her brother's action, made Kaina lose her patience, who now decided to reveal the whole truth by grabbing the can of tea leaves the young woman. Now the couple had reached the central booth of the garden. The boy confessed that he wasn't like the aristocrats, he didn't need several wives, because he wanted to dedicate himself completely to one woman. At first, Kaina found his thoughts amusing, but then she became alarmed, since she knew that if Orsini became the head of the family, her wife would suffer a collapse. Casting a quick glance at the boy's face, the girl thought for a moment that the moonlight illuminated him in an incredibly beautiful way. Instantly, she turned away and contained her thoughts, since it wasn't advantageous for her at all to admire the beauty of such a despicable guy like Orsini. Noticing the girl's shy gaze, Orsini decided that his words had had an effect. So to reinforce his stance, he added that his goal would be to make his wife the happiest in the empire. Kaina perceived her brother's emotion, but she knew him too well to believe him even a bit, even in that situation, since Orsini's whole life had been superficial, and those deep words weren't his style. Suddenly, Orsini stopped and turned to the girl. He was awkward, but for some reason he hinted that there was enough to conduct an experiment, Kaina mocked, and suggested making a tea for Isabel, since she had insisted so much that she loved the infusion from the need to apologize for his words about marriage. The guy confessed that before meeting her, he had never thought about starting a family, and that confession convinced Kaina that she hadn't been wrong. In judging her brother's habits by exposing the lie, Orsini looked down at the ground to avoid seeing how he thought. The girl's sad face as he clenched his fists. He affirmed that he had always despised men who used those words to impress women. But today he had ended up being one of them, concentrating his strength. Orsini confessed that he had acted that way only because he had fallen for the girl. From the first moment the unexpected confession left Kaina stunned. She realized that her game had gone too far. But now that the guy was in her trap, She was glad that he had dug himself a pit that she would throw him into. The anticipation of seeing Orsini suffer from the unfortunate encounter warmed Kaina's heart. Since she had never before experienced such embarrassment as the one the guy had prepared for her, she realized she hadn't asked his name, banned that it shouldn't be hard for her to drink it all. Her thoughts disappeared from her mind, and decided to remedy that omission. Suddenly, the garden resonated with Kaina's laughter. But there was no lightness in it. Rather, the girl was trying to contain a nervous breakdown. The guy was puzzled, since the girl's laughter wouldn't stop. And he certainly hadn't said anything funny. Scared Orsini started to tremble, feeling many emotions. But he didn't understand why the girl was mocking his feelings after catching her breath. Kaina stopped laughing hysterically. The situation should have ended by now. Turning to her brother, the girl asked why she was the only one finding the situation funny. Only after those words did it hit the guy that the mischievous look directed at him resembled his sister's. The guy was terrified. He had never felt so vulnerable nor revealed his feelings before. But Kaina already perceived her position of strength and started mocking her brother, since according to imperial laws, they couldn't marry while being close relatives. With each new word from Kaina, darkness loomed over Orsini even more. Though the last straw, her heart raced in her chest, but she didn't know how to turn the situation in her favor. The maid was when she happily announced that she was already married. Kaina tried to say something spicier, but he grabbed her arm tightly, squeezing the girl's body so hard that he surely left bruises. But he didn't care. He threatened to kill her after that. Kaina wasn't intimidated for long, so she took the chance and asked Orsini to keep his promise. Panicking the guy, Orsini stopped shaking her. She reminded him of the past, and that now he was much softer than as a kid. When he sensed her hesitation, the girl reached out her hand to his face to draw his gaze. She held his cheek with her hand and asked him to act like he always did when he made her cry and have chapped lips, moving her hand from the boy's face to his collarbone. The girl asked him again to remember the past and not leave any part of her body untouched. Seeing that the boy didn't move, the girl pulled him towards her with a sharp movement, giving him the chance to act like he always did. In the imperial palace, the celebration continued while a tragedy unfolded in the garden. Kaina was testing her brother's patience, reminding him of his own words when he promised to hug her only when she was good enough for him, prepared the drink, and set the cup of tea next to Isabel. However, in the next instant, a loud and sudden noise was heard, but the silence and inaction irritated her. She wished Orsini would act like usual, getting so mad that his eyes turned red. Something strange was happening between them, and her brother's slow reaction didn't indicate he wanted to take revenge on Kaina for the humiliation she caused him. Even though Orsini was holding her, the boy actually thought he was the one who had fallen into her trap. So smiling disdainfully, he tried to sound calm while insulting her with derogatory words. However, his throat tightened, preventing him from shouting stronger insults than he had already said. Determined not to accept the situation, the boy shook the girl's body and hinted that he could come up with a more clever deceit than hers. The girl's calmness shocked him, but the ease with which she touched him put him in a panic. Catching her brother's frightened look, the girl cheerfully announced that she had achieved victory in their long rivalry. The boy swatted the girl's hand away and hissed venomously that girls like Kaina would never attract anyone. But there, Orsini didn't hold back, and with a strong shove, threw the girl's body to the ground. Isabel disappeared from her place on the couch. Kaina was not surprised from the beginning. The boy trembled something unusual for him. A few years ago, he would have used his fists, but now he was even afraid to push her too hard. Sitting on the grass, Kaina watched Orsini's back as he turned away without paying her any attention. The girl was surprised that he simply walked away without shouting at her or insulting her further after the humiliation she had inflicted. Kaina knew that after drinking, Orsini became more aggressive, but his behavior surprised her, and she could do nothing but stay silent. Orsini left, and Kaina lay back down on the ground. After all that effort, she didn't get the reaction she was looking for. Take from her brother, she wished Orsini would raise his fist hard enough to leave a mark on her skin, that the boy would stare for a long time when they crossed paths in the Hades mansion. And after such a wound, she would go see their father and complain about her brother's attack, forcing the Duke to allow her to leave the mansion. The bruises from her brother's fingers on her shoulders wouldn't serve as proof of aggression. Besides, they healed quickly. She sighed in annoyance, no longer expecting the night to get any worse, though one thing satisfied her. She had assumed that resolving it would be simple. The trick worked well. The young woman who had so desperately defended, the look on Orsini's face when he realized he had been cruelly deceived, burning with shame. After sitting for a while on the grass, she understood that this outcome would be enough to stay away from Orsini for a time. After rolling around on the ground, the young woman's dress was covered in little grass leaves as she tried to clean it. She heard a soft crunch of grass behind her. Across the meadow, illuminated by the moonlight, stood Duke Valerio, his face indifferent. Although his presence to meet Kaina seemed suspicious, the Duke's arrival was sudden, so she couldn't guess how long he had been there, or what he had seen in the last moments. The silence between them remained unbroken, as the young woman grew anxious about whether he had seen anything more. The man watched her calmly. Kaina wasn't in the mood to talk. As she got up from the ground to leave the garden, the Duke's voice sounded. She still had grass on her dress in this recap manhwa. The girl froze. The situation was different from the ones she and the Duke usually experienced together. She slowly turned around. To make sure that Duke Valentino was indeed in front of her, Kaina was quite alarmed that the man had spoken for the first time in her direction. The benefits of tea suddenly didn't have the courage to try it herself. Caleb and Kaina watched as Isabel, according to Li Yuhua's memories during their 7 years of marriage, the Duke had always been the type of person who responded and did not initiate conversation. For him to decide to talk about the grass now became an unprecedented event in this married couple's life. To not seem rude, she examined the dress, although she suspected that the Duke had personal motives for starting the dialogue. She didn't see any strange leaves in the silk fabric, so when the man approached, she became alert. The Duke walked towards his wife calmly, and in a way he enjoyed giving her attention. Kaina felt a light touch on her back which startled her, because Sylvia and Valentino had never touched her himself. Stepping away from the man, she demanded to know what he intended to do behind her back. But the Duke showed her a blade of grass he was holding between his fingers, which he had just pulled from his wife's dress. She took several steps back and asked him not to do such things in the future. The man's patience was wearing thin. He threw the leaf in and pointed out harshly that the man who had been with his wife hadn't even bothered to clean up. The Duke was not kind, and clearly expressed that Lady Kaina had poor taste in men, since her secret meeting was very tense. Ran stumbling towards the door, lamenting along the way that she still had urgent matters to resolve the girl. Kaina was distraught. She couldn't believe that the Duke truly hadn't recognized Orsini. As she left the garden, the intense orange hair was a distinctive feature of the Addis family. And it wasn't hard to recognize Orsini, the best swordsman in the Empire, who sometimes traveled with Duke Valentine to fight the Black Fog. The situation seemed absurd, and Kaina refused to believe in such happy coincidences. Until that moment, Sylvia and Valentine had kept Kaina close, just to keep away other women who dreamed of marrying him. But everything changed, and at the Valentine estate a chain of worries began. Who tarnished the name of an ancient lineage? If Sylva and Valentine were to request a divorce, Duke Addis wouldn't dare deny it as he did with his daughter. Evaluating all the probabilities, the young woman approached her husband and stated that his taste in men was terrible. That was what led her to marriage. The girl tried to feign innocence when the Duke understood her game. Ran so fast that her shoes got tangled in the floorboards. Even though she managed, he began to ask questions about whether his wife would admit that her taste was bad. The man allowed himself a daring gesture. He brushed her cheek and smiling asked how her meeting in the garden with an unknown man seemed, who left the ground messy and her dress wrinkled. Sylvia liked the brief doubt on Kaina's face, openly insinuating infidelity, but she still held back the scandal. The game was just beginning. Kaina understood that her husband had caught on to her hidden motivation. That's why she decided to take advantage of the situation with Orsini until the end. The girl asked her husband not to meddle in her life. Since she had never given time to someone as despicable as her, Sylvia did not pull her hand away from the young woman's face. Calmly, she assured her that she didn't care what Mrs. Kaina did, but she had to handle the Valentine family's honor carefully. Leaning over her, the Duke suggested that she should better understand the rules of the game. Since they were exposed, having affairs on the lawn equated only to animal behavior. His words took her by surprise. She did not fully understand his analogy about outdoor animals. Each new word struck her tranquility. He had never intervened in the girl's problems before. The guards tried to say something, to shout that those inspections were pure scam. Isabel ran through the hallways non-stop. Her life would now be harder. Now the man spoke openly that she did not behave like a noble lady. Kaina pretended she actually wanted to provoke her husband to decide on the divorce himself. The fact that he dared to accuse her of dirty deeds when he himself had never touched her angered her. On her wedding night, Li Yuhua waited hours for her husband, who never arrived even when there was the exchange of bodies. And Kaina suffered wounds from her mother-in-law. The Duke did not visit her. That man never treated her as an equal, so it suited him not to talk about nobility, something he lacked. It made no sense to hide it. The young woman stated it directly. The 7 years of marriage were lived without a husband who feared taking on responsibilities. Such arrogance was new to the Duke, so it suited him not to talk about nobility, something he lacked. It made no sense to hide it. The young woman stated it directly. The 7 years of marriage were lived without a husband who feared taking on responsibilities. Such arrogance was new for the Duke, so he listened silently to the charges accumulated by his wife over the years, while covering his eyes with his palm. The man decided he understood the true offense of his wife looking at her with disdain. Tears rolled down her face, but she didn't want to accept her guilt. However, she would forever remember her brother's gaze. He exposed the dirty truth about their union, and asked for confirmation if the whole issue was that he didn't leave her in his bed. Kaina felt uncomfortable. She thought her husband was more logical, but now everything seemed like an absurd joke. Deep down, Kaina mocked the Duke's confidence, but keeping calm, she convinced him that the shared nights didn't affect her. The Duke remembered the embarrassing situation of their wedding night when Kaina came into his room naked, and although now Li Yuhua was blushing, she had to convince him that the past didn't disturb her by pointing her finger at him. She stated that after all the failed nights, she understood that the Duke was not capable of taking on his marital duty. Sylvia frowned. She didn't like those conclusions, and demanded that he explain what he meant by her lack of strength. Kaina entertained herself. She pretended to be concerned and said that the body of the Duke was wearing down from working so much. The girl knew that would hurt his confidence, but he started this war by ignoring her doubts, and admitted that for a while now he understood that the Duke lacked the necessary energy in his youth. His eyes filled with disgust and dislike that looked so much like their father's. Kaylin was hurrying out of Lucy's room. At some point, Kaina could have crossed the line, but she couldn't stop now. She recognized that she felt sorry for the Duke. He had hidden such a fact before the wedding, but since they were married, she would keep it a secret and not spread rumors. To deliver the final blow, the girl stated that if she had known earlier, she would never have married Sylvia and Valentine. The Duke listened to his wife's monologue without reacting, although he was surprised that she was now treating him differently. However, seeing the relaxation in the man's body, Kana wasn't sure she had achieved the desired outcome. And she was right, since he claimed that after what he heard, he hoped Kana would understand his refusal. To try to convince her of his masculine strength, the pride in Sylvia's eyes actually annoyed him. He had decided that everything Kana said was just to provoke him into action. Now he couldn't avoid facing the main objective and decided to show firmness. The girl pointed out that her actions aimed to obtain the divorce that Duke Hades rejected, and it wasn't convenient for Sylvia and Valentine to think that everything happened to lead him to bed with. The emotions overwhelmed her. She demanded not to be treated lightly for any way. He found it hard to believe his sister's betrayal, overwhelmed with emotions. He started to get a headache, so he wanted to quickly resolve what had poisoned the tea. Soon she would make sure their marriage ended. Surrounding him, she decided to end the conversation, still not believing what had happened. Was an attempt to get his attention so it no longer made sense to continue. Kana looked at him angrily. But the man walked up the palace stairs without looking at her. When the new day arrived, Kana was happy that what happened at dinner was behind them, because too much had happened for her first social appearance. The girl had been working in the lab since morning, when Reca brought her the news that Orsini had left the palace to train with the sword alone. Kana was surprised to learn that her brother had left the house early, as per Reca's story. He shouldn't train alone with a sword, since he holds the rank of master, not that of a beginner. Orsini was the best sword master in the empire, so his pride wouldn't allow him to go train alone. Ikana knew that in the boy the shame was so intense that he couldn't even be with her in the same house. One of the maids arrived at the lab and informed her that the Duchess Valenidno had a guest waiting in the living room. The girl's mood was lifted by the news about Orsini, so much so that she didn't initially realize. Kana ordered the tea leaves again and pointed to her brother, the flower of the red bean that was also purple, that they weren't expecting any guests. When Kana went up to the living room, she was stunned to see the guest visiting her. Argon Isenberg was sitting in a chair and had been waiting for a while, which was starting to annoy him. So, although gently he scolded Kana for the delay, even though the maid had already informed him about the prince's visit, Kana couldn't understand his true intentions. She had no connection with the prince. His kind behavior put her on alert. When Argon approached, she couldn't resist and took the girl's hand, since many ideas had come to him since dinner. Without hesitation, the boy kissed her hand and tried to flatter her with a compliment about her beauty. Kana didn't know how to react to such a close greeting, so she limited herself to a dry thank you. Perhaps the prince intended to win her heart with compliments, but his intense gaze unsettled her more than it drew her closer. Argon asked Kana to get ready to go to the imperial palace to meet the empress and the first princess. The girl asked for a little time, but the prince insisted inappropriately that the wait for a beauty excited him, so the duchess had no reason to rush. The prince left the property to wait for Kana in the courtyard, where his assistants were preparing the carriage for the return. Kaelin and the maid examined the evidence. Although they couldn't distinguish it from the tea leaves, Kana explained that the dried flowers of the bean. When Kana returned, she surprised the prince by being ready to leave without any servants. To her, it was strange that members of the imperial family traveled without escort, just in a carriage. The prince's attention shifted from Kana to her backpack, where several potions were prepared. She didn't feel comfortable near the prince and had no desire to prolong the conversation as soon as she answered his question dryly. The prince stepped back and announced that he would read a book during the trip. This quick retreat alarmed her even more. The prince was Lillian's brother, and after meeting the princess at a reception, Kana believed that bad temper was common among all relatives. Although Argon tried to appear kind, she saw more resemblance to his mother than to the princess. So she trusted that the trip would be safe. The carriage moved calmly along a wooded road leading to the imperial palace. Silence persisted as Kana observed the landscapes out the window, and the prince pretended to be absorbed in reading. Periodically, she looked at the prince, not understanding why they had sent a son of a concubine instead of one of the empress's servants. The treatment of the first princess was a delicate matter, and sending a son of a concubine who competes with the empress for a place for her son on the throne was reckless. They have no smell and look like lavender. Visually pulling out two distinct flowers from the bunch showed the differences. Her thoughts were interrupted by the noise of a book being slammed shut. She periodically looked at the prince, not understanding why they had sent her a son of a concubine and not one of the empress's servants. The treatment of the first princess was a delicate matter, and sending a son of a concubine who competes with the empress for the throne's position was reckless. His thoughts were interrupted by the sound of a book slamming shut, and by the suspicious question from the prince asking what was bothering her. The carriage continued to move through the forest, so Kana couldn't hide and had to start a conversation. The boy mentioned that in the palace, they were discussing how Kana cried at the banquet. After the second princess shouted at the duchess, the prince's actions contradicted his promises. He stopped reading the book, and now all his interest was focused on discussing the previous dinner. The boy laughed. He also wanted to see the duchess crying, but during the discussion, he was on the balcony. Then he reopened the books and resumed reading. But the hurried comment about seeing her tears soon scared Kana. The carriage fell silent. Not even the sounds of the forest could be heard. The bean flowers had a darker color, and the buds were denser upon taking one last look at the flowers, which made the situation more dangerous in this recap manhwa. It was rumored that the first prince was an eccentric who sometimes did things that could hurt others. Suddenly the carriage came to a sudden stop. The sounds of the wheels screeched and echoed through the forest. Kana lost her balance but had no time to grab onto anything. The carriage shook harder, so fear was evident in her eyes. Then the prince's hand tightened around her wrist, preventing her from moving, after calming the shakes a bit. With a sudden movement, the prince pulled her towards his chest and hugged her tightly. The guy tried to feign concern, assuring that he did it to prevent her face from hitting the glass. Kana moved away from the guy when the carriage stopped, so he wouldn't touch her again. She took several steps back. The doors of the carriage opened. One of the coachmen was scared, but wanted to know if the aristocrats were okay. The coachman asked them to get out of the carriage to fix the wheels that had lost their grip. Unfortunately for Kana, the carriage was stuck deep in the forest, so it was unlikely anyone was nearby to help. Kana noticed that Kaelin knew a lot about botany. However, that didn't calm him down in the room. The prince kicked the ground, splashing drops of mud, and approached Kana, offering to hold her so she wouldn't get dirty. The young woman stepped back from the carriage. She didn't care about getting dirty. Rather, she was afraid of being alone with the prince. Just stepping away a bit, she turned to him and thanked him for his concern. The young man's pride was hurt as the Duchess again rejected his offer of help. The young woman acknowledged she could handle everything by herself, so there was no need to worry about her. It pained the prince that the Duchess was so independent, and that comment caught her off guard. When the young woman looked at the prince, her worst fears were confirmed as with a direct swipe of his sword, he killed the coachman of the carriage. A spray of blood splattered upwards as the poor deer's body fell to the ground, and Kana, without averting her gaze, watched the prince's actions tightly gripping her infusion backpack, demanding an explanation for the prince's action as she looked down at the sword stained with thick blood. Kana realized that the rumors about the prince's madness had been downplayed. Raising the sword, the young man grinned mischievously. A silence fell before he started to worry about how toxic the red bean flowers could be. Kana dismissed it, and instead of answering, he wanted to know what Kana thought of the situation. The prince rested the blade of the sword on the young woman's shoulder. She felt her soul fighting against the fear, but wanted to know what would happen. The silence stretched on. With a smooth motion of his hand, the prince made a cut on the young woman's skin, leaving a wound. That action was not casual. The way the prince confidently held the sword indicated he was ready to kill her. The boy smiled and offered her a choice: she could resolve the situation herself, or in the end she would end up asking for his help. It had been a long time since he had gotten involved in aristocratic brawls, and the prince's attitude, as if he felt offended by her rejection of his help, surprised her. She hadn't expected him to be willing to kill her just to prove his justice and concern. In her backpack, she carried means of self-defense, but the situation didn't allow her to risk pulling them out. Her hands trembled with fear, but Kana had to acknowledge defeat and adapt to the prince. The girl smiled innocently and pretended she couldn't fix the hem of her skirt, which was wet and full of mud. Even though she didn't want to, she knew she only had one life, so she sacrificed her pride. But Kaelin already took her and removed her from the guard's shoulder. A look of determination crossed the boy's face, as if he had made the most important decision of his life, saying those buds were just herbs, leaving her brother puzzled. The girl explained that the danger of those flowers, so that the prince wouldn't completely lose his mind. Argon was deep in thought. He had achieved what he was after, but the quick submission of the Duchess did not please him. After waiting a few minutes, Argon raised his sword and moved it away from the girl. A triumphant smile appeared on his face. Suddenly, several soldiers in black cloaks emerged from the trees, who had been watching the cart from the beginning. The prince ordered them to repair the cart and then escort them to the palace since he had killed the coachman. Kana managed to escape the trap, as the prince had planned everything, especially for her to believe she was alone. If she had used her self-defense skills, she would have been killed instantly by the soldiers hiding in the shadows of the forest. Argon kindly extended his hand to the girl, suggesting they resume their path since the Duchess was not allowed to walk with dirty shoes. Kana placed her hand in the prince's. She had to tolerate his company for a while until she felt safe in the palace. Kana played along, even though her heart was racing uncontrollably in her chest. She couldn't show fear, only manifest when consuming a lot, and the symptoms start with stomach pain. Kaelin was saddened by Lucy's symptoms. To prove his superiority, the prince had to commit murder, which is why she would accept his help without asking questions. Upon getting into the carriage, Argon's mood was good, despite having a corpse behind him, covered in blood. He didn't worry about it. They spent the whole way to the palace in complete silence. And when the carriage arrived at the entrance of the building, Argon left Kana without saying a single word when Kana met the Empress. The woman was concerned about the injury on her hand and wanted to call a doctor, but Kana rejected that attention. The Empress understood that the girl had issues with the prince, so she promised to give her a scolding tonight. When they accompanied her to Amelia's quarters, she was already calm, and her hands stopped shaking while the maid helped the princess take off her shirt. Kana decided that for now she didn't need the Empress's help with her problems, since she hadn't yet resolved her main dilemma. This time the princess didn't resist the examination, and Kana was able to demonstrate her skills, since an opportunity like treating members of the imperial family, they were much worse than just a stomachache. The girl stroked her brother's shoulder, asking him not to worry. Doesn't come around twice. On the princess's body, there were many reddish bruises. The skin was so inflamed that under the bruises there were signs of pus and infection. Noticing that the bruises were round, Kana concluded that the illness resembled coin-shaped eczema. To discover the cause of the illness, Kana asked to be told all the treatments the princess had tried. But the Empress interrupted the conversation and asked for the ointment that Amelia used for treatment. The maid returned with bottles of dark gray liquid that, according to the princess, relieved the itching. Upon seeing the medication, Kana lost her speech since she couldn't believe it was possible that anyone had used such a remedy. Noticing the doubt on the Duchess's face, the Empress explained that they always followed the doctor's advice, which coincided on the treatment methods. According to the doctor's prescription, she had to bathe several times a day with medicinal infusions and apply this ointment on the red spots. Kana couldn't believe that any doctor would prescribe a mercury-based treatment. She assured him she knew what to do, so there's definitely no dangerous poison in the tea, the red bean flowers. When she entered university, she presented an essay on how in the Middle Ages in the West, they used mercury to cure skin diseases, while in the East, doctors were focused on creating an immortality potion from this liquid metal. But none of the doctors knew the toxic properties of mercury, so these methods caused more deaths than cures. Now that she had returned from another world, she didn't expect to find that similar treatment methods existed, so she needed to find out how long the princess had been using this remedy. Pensive, the Empress confessed that they had just started treating her recently, so Kana calmed down since in 2 weeks. The princess's body wouldn't accumulate poison. The girl prohibited the princess from using the medicine in this bottle, but the Empress did not approve this decision. The woman screamed that without this ointment, they couldn't fight the itching, which was getting more intense with each passing day. Amelia listened in silence to the instructions now Kana had prohibited. Frequent bathing to avoid irritating the skin on the girl's back. The areas affected by the disease shouldn't be taken with the medication she prepared for Lucy since it contains licorice. We're very deep water. Couldn't be applied there, only clean with a damp towel, the marks of pus, and inflammations. Suddenly, the princess let out a laugh, prohibiting the use of medications. Meant she could die from the unbearable itching for her to reduce the time in the bath. Wouldn't help at all to get rid of the inflammations. Amelia started shouting. Now she doubted Kana's knowledge. Since her methods deviated from practices that alleviated her life, the girl demanded the Empress get rid of Kana, since all her advice seemed like rumors from street charlatans. But Kana remained calm and responded, honestly, that continuing with the old treatment would soon lead to the princess's death. The princess screamed. But Kana didn't listen to any more shouts and firmly stated that the princess would never recover without her recommendations. Panic appeared in Amelia's eyes. She didn't know whether to accept a fleeting hope of healing. Kana decided to go to the source and explain that excessive water procedures dried out the skin, which aggravated the disease. The young woman chose to mention the negative effects of mercury. Kana explained with a simple example that mixing the extracts of red bean and licorice increases the toxic properties of the bean flowers. But she quickly interrupted herself, since she had to present it correctly in the Western continent. Mercury was hardly used as medicine, so there hadn't been any cases of poisoning yet. So if she started accusing the ointment of being toxic, they would have called her a liar, so she simply said that the ointment was toxic to the skin. But her words enraged Amalea, who considered the imperial doctor an incompetent specialist who had failed. With such a mood, there could be no discussion. So Kana hinted that the doctor simply hadn't been able to help the princess. But that didn't mean he wasn't competent in other treatments. That argument silenced the princess. The words reached her mind, and before resuming the discussion, she wanted to reflect. Kana decided to consolidate the results. Convincing the princess was difficult but possible, since she had suffered the disease for years and no method had been effective. The Empress did not interrupt the conversation, although she was surprised that Amelia was interested in herself in the recovery program. But Kana's words about enduring the itching instantly enraged the princess. Kana decided that the purpose of this tea was to make Lucy slightly ill, since only doctors. The young woman jumped out of bed and ran toward Kana. It infuriated her that she could suggest enduring the burning that embraced her skin. She threw the ointment jar to the ground and demanded an explanation of how she could endure something that even the remedies couldn't soothe the princess. She clenched her fists and complained that her body was burning with flames and that every day she was ready to die. From her medical experience, Kana knew that patients with prolonged illnesses didn't think logically. They needed another approach, so she ordered the princess to endure with all her strength to combat the condition. That's why the faith emanating from the doctor could be transmitted to the patient, so seeing the determination in Kana's gaze, Amelia began to consider new steps for treatment. Kana helped the princess get to bed and promised to prepare a medication that would ease the symptoms. But first, they needed to change all the garments in the princess's wardrobe for clothing made of natural cotton. Amelia found it incredibly difficult to argue. Even now, she didn't want to wear cotton clothes to avoid looking like a commoner. Holding the princess's hands, Kana reassured her, assuring that her skin would feel better in cotton clothes than in the silk dresses that aristocrats adored. Know how to interact correctly with licorice? The girl asked the maid for a piece of paper and started taking notes. The princess's patience ran out. She yanked her hand away from Kana's grip and made a move to hit her, but Kana did not take the hit as the princess pointed a finger at the maid and ordered her to bring her new clothes immediately, then turned to Kana, demanding her to detail all the therapeutic recommendations. Seeing the sudden firmness in Amelia's expression, Kana began to stutter, but quickly indicated the necessary changes to the sheets to avoid injuries to the skin. After hearing the suggestions, the princess ordered the servants to prepare everything immediately to start the treatment without delay. Kana understood the princess's prolonged suffering, so her clinging to hope seemed completely normal to her. The Empress interrupted with her voice needing to know what medications were required for recovery, so Kana requested to bring several herbs from the eastern continent. The woman vowed to use all her connections to obtain the necessary plants to heal her daughter. Inside, Kana celebrated having convinced the imperial family and guiding them towards a new medical approach. The deception was for Kaelin to break the contract with Kana if Lucy remained sick, however, when the situation got out of control. After an exhausting day, Kana arrived at the Sadi's mansion well into the night. Kucher opened the carriage doors, but the girl was weak and couldn't get out of the carriage, immediately regaining her strength. She got down without the help of the coachman, but her health worried her. Her head was spinning, a flush appeared, red on her cheeks from the impending fever, and the wound on her shoulder began to burn. The bandage on her shoulder soaked with blood, and the strong smell made her feel nauseous. Walking slowly through the foyer, Kana dealt with dizziness. Although the wound wasn't deep, the psychological shock hit her hard, but she walked so slowly down the hallway that she couldn't help, running into Duke Alexandro. According to his attire, the father was preparing to leave the mansion. Even though she had dark bags under her eyes, she looked the same as always upon noticing her father's hand on the sword. A strong chill ran through her body. Her mind immediately recalled Prince Aragon and his threats in the woods this morning. Shaking her head slightly, she reminded herself she was at home, so her father likely wouldn't attack her with the sword. The person who made the substitution should already be terrified, but Kana knew Isabel would avoid any punishment. She was preparing to pass by her father, but he appeared by her side in an instant and asked her not to leave so quickly. Her gaze fell on the bandaged shoulder that she was awkwardly pressing against her chest, unable to contain the impulse. The father extended his hand toward the wound that had captured all her attention, but before inspecting the bandage, the man lifted his daughter's chin to focus on her tired face. He didn't let go, and the tone of his voice wasn't cold, but it demanded that she tell him what had happened to Kana. The hallway was silent, and the father's words echoed through the room. But when Kana understood his meaning, she paused for a moment. Her father had never shown interest in her matters, so now she wanted to quickly get out of his presence. Lowering her head, she invented a common excuse about an accident, and she asked her father to let her go. She didn't believe he would be willing to listen, as she doubted he would accept. That his daughter had sacrificed her pride for her own life, finding herself in a situation where Prince Iseberg ignored her rank as duchess and threatened her with his sword. The sad memories of the prince were joined by Orsini's words in the garden, when he assured her that no one would take care of her. In the past, he had always occupied the position of an observer who kept his distance from events even if he noticed her presence. Kaelin didn't know what he would do with his sister, but now Lucy's state was the most important thing to him. The girl finished writing on the sheet. The recipe for the father held her face, while her thoughts swirled, but still concluded that she would resolve everything herself. It irritated her that her father's gaze expressed concern for her so lying. She said that she was already very strong. Kana planned to walk away, but suddenly he grabbed her shoulder where the wound was covered with bandages. Forcing his daughter to be quiet, he took the girl's hand and carefully moved it aside to examine the injured spot. However, due to the rough grip, new blood seeped between the bandages, staining the Duke's hand red. Now the Duke's tone was cold. He demanded authoritatively that she explain what had happened, but his voice didn't match his face. Where evident fear showed, as he looked at the bleeding wound, the man was taller than Kana, and at that moment she felt trapped. Smiling ironically, she couldn't hold back a biting comment and asked what reward the father would give to the one who had abused his daughter. His words hurt him, but Kana didn't stop. She laughed because before the Duke had shown her the consequences of showing her pride, and Kana demanded to be let go again. Decoction that needs to be prepared and given to Lucy to drink, after which the girl would feel better. Since if the Duke had no intention of doing anything, she wanted to return to her room. The man's hand opened, and the young woman was able to step back a few paces, but the Duke remained standing in the same place. Kana didn't know why she had returned to this world. She had no family, no father. She also didn't understand why everything had to start over, so she left him alone. A white mist began to appear before her eyes. The dizziness intensified, and the last thing she managed to see was the outline of her brother, who managed to hold her before diving into the darkness. In her mind, thoughts appeared that she didn't need a family like Hades had. But the thoughts of anger faded away when in her dream she saw her mother Liu Jua, who as always was with her during her mild illness. The dream was pleasant. In it were her mother and her father, who promised to make the best soup so that his daughter would feel better. But also there was him, her younger brother, who enjoyed joking with her from time to time. Although he never perceived danger in his actions, the younger brother had grown so much during the time she was Liu Hua that now he deeply missed their shared dinners. That dream was both happy and cruel people she could no longer touch. Kana handed the recipe to the maid, ordering her to go immediately to the pharmacist and buy. They reached her through the memories in her sleepy dreams. Kana regained consciousness, but it still seemed to her that her younger brother was sitting in front of her, whom she wanted to caress the cheek of Kaelin. She was surprised. She didn't expect her sister to reach out to him and call him in her illness. As she fully regained consciousness, Kana realized that the dream had disappeared and that she was in her room, where Kaelin Addis was sitting next to her bed. It had all been a dream, and she could never again caress the head of her younger brother like before. Covering her eyes with her hand, the young woman tried to calm down. She didn't want to cry in front of Kaelin. The girl sat up in bed and asked Kaelin what had happened and how she had ended up in her room. It turned out that Kana had passed out in the hallway, so Kaelin took her to her room and ordered the servants to take care of his sister. Afterward, he waited hours for her to wake up. The night was approaching dawn, so although he managed to sleep a little, his body was still. Everything necessary when the maid left the room. Kaelin apologized for the first time to his sister for what happened, tense from the shock of having seen someone killed in the woods. In fact, almost a day after the incident. His hands were still shaking with fear for his life, but she had many important things to do, so she couldn't allow the past to ruin her plans in the present. She got rid of the sheets and headed to the lab. Kaelin demanded explanations about where the wound on her hand had come from and what had happened in the imperial palace. But the young woman ordered him to leave her room, Since now that she felt better, she didn't need to pretend to be a worried brother. Approaching his sister Kaylin, covered her shoulders with a blanket so she wouldn't get cold with the cool morning, then took the young woman's hand and asked her to tell him the truth about what happened that day. The boy was embarrassed. He wanted to listen to his sister and tell her. Dưới đây là câu đã được thêm từ khóa recap manhwa, and headed for the exit. Kaylin followed her, not understanding why his sister was going, directly to the lab when she needed to rest well the boy. The boy sat on the couch motionless. After those words escaped his mouth, Canna stood still in the doorway. She couldn't see her brother's face, so she couldn't be sure of the sincerity of his words. Although on Kaylin's face, desperation was clearly visible. She didn't continue with the conversation. The room sank into silence. Kana didn't move from her place. Standing behind her brother suddenly asked him something that had been bothering her for a long time. How over all this time Kaylin had come to be the way he was. The girl thought it was all the fault of the contract, so she assured the boy that their agreement was still valid and that he didn't need to pay extra attention. Kaylin tried to justify his actions, but his confessions,